Dr. Pam Wells is the Executive Director of the Region 4 Education Service Center. So Region 4 ESC provides support for 48 school districts and 39 public charter schools across Greater Houston. Dr. Wells has been an educator for 44 years, starting off as a teacher in Spring Branch and then moving into a variety of roles in Cy-Fair ISD, including interim superintendent. So if any of y'all are familiar with Wells Elementary in Cy-Fair ISD, that was named after Pam and her husband Jim, which is pretty cool. There was a lot more actually that Pam does in terms of teaching and serving on multiple boards and councils. But if I listed them all out, we might be here for a long time. So I'll post her bio in a follow-up email just so you guys can see all of the awesome things that Pam is involved with. But it really is a privilege for us to have you here today, Pam. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I really am. And I recognize some faces. I recognize Jeff. We worked years ago when we first started our Ministers Alliance in Cypress Fairbanks. And I'm not going to tell how long ago it was, Jeff, and you're not supposed to either, but I guess people can tell by the color of my hair how long ago it was.
I was thinking 44 years. You must have been really young when you first started.
I was about 12 when I first started teaching school, yes.
Yes.
And I actually see there's some folks from what was my home church, Cypress United Methodist Church. I now attend church with my son and daughter-in-law and grandson over in Houston just so I can be with them during church. But I'm happy to see that there are folks from Cypress United Methodist Church as well.
Awesome, love that. Cool. So I have a few questions that I wanted to start off with today. And then again, if you guys have questions, additional questions, if you could share that in the chat box as well, that would be wonderful. So just to start off with, I know COVID has messed up a lot of things. So I'm just curious, what are you all seeing that school might look like for the 2020-2021 school year?
So I know that you won't be surprised, especially there are people on this Zoom meeting who are actually in the school. So they probably can do an even better job than I can answering this question. But I do have the honor of supporting our the superintendents that are in our region and have had the opportunity to host multiple conference calls that they've held so that they can share ideas and strategies and determine what is best for the children and the parents and community and the staff members that they serve. I know you won't be surprised to hear that everything is in flux right now. I think that in virtually every case, the school districts are looking at multiple different ways that they are going to be educating children. I thought it was kind of interesting, Marilyn, that you had that picture of an empty classroom. And I think that is, of course, what we don't want to have happen. But we recognize that first and foremost, our schools are concerned about the safety and health of their children and their staff members. But right now, what most of the school districts are doing is looking at really 3 different ways to help educate or to educate their children. And in many cases, they may be implementing all 3 at any time. So they're looking at face-to-face. They are currently, it's not clear exactly what the rules are going to be related to face-to-face. There were a set of rules that had originally been established, or guidance really, not rules, but guidance. And the school districts are going to learn more next week about what some of that guidance, a little bit more clear about what that guidance might be, and actually maybe even in 2 weeks from now. So they're really identifying face-to-face opportunities, but face-to-face opportunities with social distancing. And you all who are in the schools know that especially in the Houston area, many of our schools are very, very large. And so there isn't enough square footage for them to do significant social distancing. So that's going to mean that they may have to have flexible schedules. A lot of what I've heard them talking about is maybe having very young children and children maybe who have special needs who would see their teacher every single day. They may then have additional space that they might capture from other facilities that they have to be able to have older children potentially have a week in face-to-face and then maybe a week virtual, so that they could have potentially A and B schedules. In some cases, they're looking at those kinds of schedules where they may do it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Tuesday, Thursday. They're looking at a variety of options to do two things: to focus on actually identifying and remediating the loss that has occurred this year, the learning loss. The school district, I know you will not disagree with me when I say that teachers and principals and administrators and cafeteria workers and everyone in the schools have been heroes for our children. They have done everything possible to make sure that the children know they are loved and that they are cared for, and to also try to educate them from afar. So I think that as we're looking at the current situation, and in Houston, we all know that things are looking a little, people have a great deal of concern because the numbers of cases are increasing and we're looking at more hospitalizations. So as the superintendents and principals are working with their principals, as they are developing plans, they're recognizing that those plans may end up, being the best laid plans of mice and men, but they also recognize that even if they're able to start school face-to-face, that it's likely there'll be interruptions in school. It's likely that there will be cases, positive cases, and so there might be classes or even campuses that have to shut down for a period of time to make sure that that folks have quarantined and that they don't end up expanding on that. So I know that you probably wish that I had the answer, but the answer really is that the school districts are working very, very hard to create a variety of options. And I haven't mentioned the one other thing that is really a challenge, and that is there are going to be a lot of parents that aren't going to want their children to be returning to school. They're going to be afraid, especially those children who might have some underlying health condition, or maybe even the family as a family member that does. So the school districts are right now doing lots of surveys of both parents, but also of staff, because we also know that there are some staff members who also have underlying health conditions, and so they may be teachers that might ask and prefer to teach those students who are going to be educated virtually. So if you can imagine, because you're there in the schools all the time, you know how challenging it is to plan for a school year. Can you imagine planning for a school year when you don't have a clue what is really going to happen once the children end up returning? And I will say this too, one of the other things that's happening in the schools that is of a great concern, and I alluded to it, is that we know there's been significant learning loss. Even, I don't know, how many of you raise your hand if you were actually homeschooling your own children during this time? So a lot of folks were, and you were trying to work and you were trying to support the teachers and to help them and help your children. We know that even those parents who are doing the very best job they possibly could, they now have a picture of their child's teacher that they say a prayer for every single day of thanks, because they now know how challenging that was. So I think that we really don't know how many are going to end up returning. And so the schools are trying to capture that kind of data from parents and then also from their own staff. So it's really a variety of options that they are looking at, and it's like trying to put together a puzzle. And they don't even know what all the pieces are yet, and they certainly don't know what all the rules of the game are.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Pam. In a little bit, if any of the other school district leaders want to jump in and share anything that they know about in their school districts, Denise is from Fort Bend ISD, and then Jerry and Marilyn with Humble, Jessica with Houston ISD.
So Marilyn, Humble, I would love for someone from Humble to share. I'm quite excited about what the schedules that some of the folks in Humble are working on. I've had conversations with their superintendent. So if there's anyone that, I'm sure you could do, those of you who are from that school district could do a better job than I do, but if you'd like to share.
I'm trying to see.
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Thanks, Mr. Malone.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So really what Humble has done, and I don't want to just say it outright because I may chop some of it up, but it's basically going to be a mixture between both virtual and face-to-face instruction. The difficulty obviously is when you have a district of that size with schools with such large numbers, you want to honor what the state is saying and what the governmental leaders are adhering to. But at the same time, you do want to have some level of consistency to address, like she just said, the learning loss of students. And so, you know, we're understanding that it can change on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis. But right now, it's going to kind of look like a hybrid in some cases, with in many cases, maybe 50% of the school coming on one day and on another. And I'm speaking for high school, not elementary and middle. You know, and I'm sure someone else could probably speak to more of the different age groups. But again, they're doing a very proactive job and meeting frequently to just kind of decide what is best for our population of students and how can we minimize and increase the likelihood of catching them back up and then, you know, filling those gaps that they missed from missing so much school. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, not specifically, but yeah, just a hybrid of both face-to-face and virtual instruction as well, so that we're honoring the social distancing protocols that are being advised.
So in addition, I think, and once again, you may be able to elaborate better than I could, but I think that Humble is also looking at a little bit different calendar. In fact, they've had a little bit different calendar in the past that allows them some flexibility. Some of the school districts are putting days at the end of the school year in case they have to close to give some additional instructional time for their students. Some are doing, I saw there were some folks from Spring here. I know Spring is looking at potentially doing what's called an intersession calendar, where there will be longer breaks within the school year. And then once again, if the children end up having to go home, rather than have instruction, then they will provide some virtual instruction, but they also would have some additional days to help remediate. Because we know, as I said before, there's been a loss in learning. And as I was sharing with you before, those of you who've really worked hard with your children, you know how challenging it is. Think about the families who don't have the capacity to be able to help their children. They may not have internet connectivity. They may not speak English. They may be struggling to put food on the table for their children, so they can't be there. They may have multiple children and they may have one computer. And so if you think about the challenges that you've had with your children or your neighbors have had with their children, and you think about those children in poverty, and you know, we have about 63% of the children in our entire region that are children of poverty, and we have in many school districts far higher percentage than that. So I think that the issue of school calendars has become a way that schools are trying to determine ways to really figure out ways to give additional time. I know in Cypress Fairbanks, they just recently made the decision to expand the school day to give some additional minutes. So the school districts are trying to be as creative as possible, but also to do what their own communities want. You know, in one community, the idea of year-round school or intersession calendars is going to work very, very well. Whereas in another school district, it might not be as successful. So working on creating calendars that are going to be flexible so that they can remediate during the year is another issue that they are all trying to.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Mr. Malone also for jumping in there. I think probably what a lot of churches here are thinking about is, so with all of these challenges going on, what are ways that we can help? So do you have some thoughts on that?
Sure. So I think if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of tag that on to kind of what have been the greatest challenges. We've talked about some of those. One of the huge challenges has been food insecurity. You know, many of our children in the region eat sometimes 3 meals a day at school. And so many of those children were not accessing the meals that the schools had available. We had far, far less participation, even though the schools had the food available, but it was hard for parents to get to it. You know, obviously when their children are in school, they go to school and they're able to eat. When in this situation, the parents were in a position where they had to go and get food, or in many cases, school districts took buses into communities and distributed food that way. But I think the issue of food insecurity is a way that the churches could help. I know I am proud to be a board member of Sci-Hope in the Cypress Fairbanks School District, in the backpack program, the food backpack program that they do. And I'm sure many of you do the very same thing. That is going to become even more critical as we have families that have lost jobs and that sort of thing. So I think helping with whatever way you can, whether it's partnering with the food bank or partnering with the school district to help with food insecurity. That I think is one of the things that school districts are really concerned about. This issue of the digital divide is another thing that I think churches could help school districts with. There is such a disparity, such inequities in what our children have available to them in terms of being able to do school at home. And I know there are lots of initiatives. I'm actually on a task force that the mayor started to try to look at getting support from the telecom industries and that sort of thing to try to reduce that digital divide. But actually, when Marilyn and I were talking at one time, I think she came up with this idea, I didn't, but we were talking about how maybe churches could open up their facilities, their churches, to be a place where kids could come and do homework and do work. You have Wi-Fi in your churches close to you, and you have space. And so I think that anything that you can do to support the instructional, the diminishing of that divide, and therefore the instructional support of children, I think is critical, because that divide, we had inequities in our schools before COVID. Those inequities have just been exacerbated. And not because the teachers weren't working hard, nor because the parents didn't care. It's just the circumstances were such that divide has gotten so much greater. So I think anything that you can do to support your own families and even in your communities with dealing with this digital divide, I think is an issue. And then also, many of you I know have mentorship programs. And I think that's going to be an issue that we've got to kind of sift through, because depending upon what the rules are for social distancing and the rules related to health and safety for the children, I can't tell you right now what the schools are going to do. During the summer, they were told there should be no guests who come into the schools. And by guests, that even meant parents, that unless the parent was there for a parent meeting, that they didn't want volunteers in the schools. That was actually guidance that the governor's office, or the health folks that advised the governor had recommended. Now, whether or not that's going to extend into the school year, you know, I think a lot of that will just depend upon what the rate of infection is and that sort of thing. But if you are able to get into the schools, and those of you who have not had a chance to partner with a school and develop a mentoring program, I think that is going to be something that's going to be really, really helpful to the schools. And then I think I should have started with the most important thing, and that is that I think that you can pray for the schools. I know that was always meaningful to me when the churches let us know that they were praying for the school district and for the teachers and the children and the parents. I think that helping to identify also those frontline heroes, raising them up and elevating them and making it public that you recognize what they have done during this pandemic. Teachers have been heroes. cafeteria workers have stood out in the hot sun. Many of them have unfortunately contracted COVID because they were doing it, and they have made sure that those parents who could get to the schools to get food received that food. And then there were teachers standing in that same line with principals handing out packets to children who didn't have internet accessibility. So I think if you could actually have some overtly organized and public supports when school starts back to recognize those heroes who are educators, I think that is something that I think would be very helpful. One other thing that's happening right now that you could help your community, your folks who are in your church community know about, is there are some supports for families that, especially eligible children who are on free and reduced lunch through the PEBT. I don't know if any of y'all know about this, but it's a pandemic EBT. It's associated with SNAP. Those family members who are in poverty, who already receive SNAP benefits, automatically receive this additional money for food. But there are many families who do not receive SNAP, but if their children are on free and reduced lunch, their children are eligible for this and they would need to apply. So those kinds of helping the schools to communicate about some of the things that are available to the families, and that of course directly impacts food insecurity, which quite frankly directly impacts whether or not children can learn. If they're hungry, they're not able to learn. And I think that's the thing that kept me up at night the most when this started. Obviously, I'm a school teacher, so I'm concerned about whether or not children learn. But my first concern was, are the children eating? And that really, I know that was true of a lot of our. I don't know if those are any ideas, if those ideas have generated any questions, or Marilyn, if you have any other, one thing I did not mention is the mental health of our children and our staff. That is a huge concern. And for those of us, the people I'm looking at your faces right now, I don't have to tell you that the children and the families in the Houston area have been through so much trauma over the course of the last several years that it's even hard to imagine when you think about the Tax Day floods and the Memorial Day floods and Harvey. And then we had the tragedy in Santa Fe with the school shooting and the death of 10 students and teachers. And then we had, those of you who are on the east side, we had the ITC tank fire, and children were afraid that if they walked outside that they were going to die from the air. And then now we have COVID. It kind of boggles your mind to think about the trauma that these children have experienced in this short period of time. So whatever you can do to support mental health of those children and families that are at in your churches, I think that is a critical thing. And many of you have counseling services in your churches that at least the families, even if they happen to not be members of your churches, might be able to make available. And our schools are redoubling their efforts and are partnering with lots of different organizations to help. They have counselors in the schools. We have a lot of people who have even more need than just what the school counselors can do. So that's another, these are just kind of popping into my head right now. That's another thing that I think is a huge challenge where the churches could help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pam. And we will share some of these ideas afterwards. I also have some follow-up ideas and examples of what some of the other churches have done. But there are a few questions that have come into the chat box. So Mel, if you want to lead this.
Absolutely. And we'll try to get to everybody's, but given the time, I'm going to try to select some of the questions. Pastor Brad is asking Pam, much of the school experience, especially in high school, are the extra activities like sports, band, music, theater. And I also know that a lot of our churches do before school or after school programs. Any insight on how schools and churches would deal with those kind of activities?
So you've probably seen that the rules kind of changed just a couple weeks ago, and for UIL activities, there were some things that schools could begin doing. Initially, they couldn't, and there were some things they could begin doing. And then all of a sudden, as soon as they did, then there were some cases that popped out. So some of those rules are kind of in flux as it relates to the school districts, but everyone understands how important those things are to not just to the excitement that children have in participating in them, but they help them be more successful in terms of their academics as well. So, you know, it could be that there might be some ways if schools have some challenges associated with whatever rules end up being that their expectation, then it could be that the churches might be able to, you know, to have a role in doing that as well. But I wish I could tell you what all the answers are right now in terms of what those rules are. But they're, as I said, they're kind of changing. We thought they were loosening, and then as soon as they began loosening, then there have been some unfortunate situations where like teams have had someone contract COVID and then they've had to quit their weight room working or whatever. So I'm not sure if that answered the question. If it didn't, feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, feel free to respond, Brad, in the chat if you'd like. But yeah, I think one of the principles, and you all know, is to ask the schools what they need for help, right? And to check in with the principal or whoever your school contact is every summer before the school year starts. So that's definitely a great question to ask during that meeting before school starts. How can we help? Did this that we were doing, can that keep happening? Or what else can we do right now? We've had several questions about the PEBT. So I'm going to try to ask them in twofold.
Okay.
Get some clarity around if a school is a Title I school, is every student's family eligible for the PEBT? And then secondly, what about younger children in the feeder pattern who are not yet enrolled in school? Are they eligible?
So I am embarrassed to tell you that I don't know the answer to the second question. The way that the Commissioner of Education, Commissioner Morath, has asked each of the school districts to actually send information directly to the families who are eligible, because it's really the schools who are the only ones who know who are eligible. And what I've been told is that it is any child who is currently been identified as eligible for free and reduced lunch. In most cases, there are some schools that actually provide meals, even if there is a child who personally doesn't. You know, I mean, like they'll have a school-wide meal program. But in terms of this one, I'm going to have to get back with you. I don't know if for PEBT, it has to be, the qualification has to be for the individual child. I think that is the case, but I would not want to have you say that to any of your folks and it not be correct. So I can find that out and then get back with y'all, and I'll give that information to Marilyn. Unless there's somebody on the call from one of the school districts that knows the answer. I will find out the answer to that.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. If a church was to reopen their facilities and provide computer access or internet access, will all students have the opportunity to access like the Ingenuity platform or whatever school platform?
So that is a question that you mentioned. What needs to happen is to go to the school and ask what do you need? Those are likely, the answer to that question is likely dependent upon the school district and the school. Most students, though, can access their own student information system platform from any computer. So that although they may not be able to give the church itself access, as long as you have internet access, students should be able to get to whatever platform the school district has available for them. If I answered the question, if I understood the question.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And feel free to respond too. And thank you, Jessica, for responding. She works with Houston ISD, so that all students in Houston ISD were offered free lunch. So if they have students, then they can apply. And then Marilyn Mann from Humble ISD is also providing a telephone number and some information above about the PEBT. Just a couple more questions. You're talking about the different schedules that each district may have. Is it also possible that each school campus may have its own schedule, or will all schools follow a district calendar?
That's a great question. And I think it is possible that they will have a different schedule depending upon the age of the children and the needs of the children. I mentioned earlier that I have heard several school district superintendents talk about younger children like pre-K through maybe third grade, having one schedule where they might come to school every single day. And maybe if they don't have enough space, if the rules are such that they don't have enough space on their campus to have every child there for the full day every day, then maybe the older children might have a different schedule. I think it is going to be, and it is also, of course, dependent upon the number of children enrolled in that school and how, what their square footage and what their classroom space allocations are. So I do think it's possible that there might be different, I doubt maybe in a smaller school district, maybe they may give each school the opportunity to make those decisions. I doubt that it would be, this school has this schedule and this, unless it is focused on the needs of the children themselves, because that would be too chaotic for the school district to have to deal with. Now, some school districts are so efficient that they use a bus to bus 3 different, levels of children. They have a bus that does elementary school, middle school, and high school, the same bus, to try to be efficient. That's going to be a huge challenge. Those school districts that have been really efficient with your tax dollars are going to have a real challenge if there are huge constraints on how many children they can transport at a time.
Well, thank you, Pam. I know it's 2 o'clock, so I'm going to let Marilyn close. And we have one more question, so maybe after Marilyn closes, I can ask Linda's question real quick, and anyone who wants to stay on to listen to the answer can stay on. But Marilyn?
Yeah, I actually like Linda's question a lot. So I'm going to ask it so that you guys know what she asked. But is Region 4 looking at ways other countries are planning doing education? I think that's a very interesting question. I will close here. Thank y'all so much for joining us. I'm going to send out just a follow-up email with a lot of the information that we shared today, plus additional ideas and resources. So be looking out for an email from me either later today or tomorrow. But thank y'all so much again for joining us. And I will let Pam answer the last question.
Okay, I'll be happy to. So yes, we are looking at what's happening in other countries. We've had conversations about that among superintendents. Some of the countries don't have the same kind of school schedule as we do. And so we have some examples of different countries that have had a COVID epidemic and now have already started back to school. In fact, I actually had the opportunity to serve on a committee that the Greater Houston Partnership, which is the Chamber of Commerce for Houston, implemented, and I was on the group that focused on education, and we actually did do research. We looked at what was happening in Korea. We looked at what was happening in some of the Scandinavian countries. We actually looked at what was happening in England as well. And there have been some learning opportunities from that. 2 things, I think. One is, the good news is it appears in some places that the spread via children has not been as high as they might have anticipated. The caveat to that is some of the doctors that were on our committee said many times children have COVID, but they don't present with any symptoms. And so it's possible for children to spread the disease even though they don't have any evident symptoms. But that was one thing that was kind of interesting. The problem, especially for the Houston area, is that most of these countries have really small schools compared to the ones we have. We have schools that have 4,000 children in them in high school. And we have elementary schools that have 1,300 children in them. Very few of the other countries have schools the same size we do. And so some of the learning was, it still would be a little challenging because of the, it's just a little bit more difficult to try to figure it out when you have large. But yes, and there actually is some of that information available on a website that the Greater Houston Partnership has. And I can also share that with anyone who would be interested in looking at it. I apologize for being so long-winded that you didn't get to ask many questions, but Marilyn has my, and I can just give it to you right now, my email address. If somebody wants to type it into the chat, I can't talk and type at the same time, is pam.wells at the letters ESC, the number 4.net. And I'd be more than happy to help you. And as a person who believes strongly in the importance of churches supporting our schools, I mean, I believe that strongly. I can tell you that when we first started our ministerial alliance in Cy-Fair, we had no idea what the great benefit was going to be. It far exceeded any idea that we even had, and continues to this day. And I really love the goals of Loving Houston. I think that you were so right when you said 1,500 campuses is a lot of campuses, but we have many more churches. So I really appreciate what you all are doing. And if there's anything that I can do to help you and support you, I'm happy to do that. Actually, we actually hosted, if I remember correctly, a training session for Loving Houston before I even knew what Loving Houston was. I was here at Region 4.
Yes, thank you so much, Pam. This was wonderful. It was so helpful, so valuable. So thank you so much. And thank you to each one of you all who are on the call. I know y'all are doing amazing things with your churches and with your schools and school districts. So thank you so much for your leadership and your service. Really appreciate that a lot. I know we were going to have either Allie or Mel close us in prayer. Would one of you mind doing that?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to, just in case Allie's internet isn't working. But let's pray. Lord, we are so grateful for gathering our body of believers together because we are on mission with you, joining you in the work that you are doing in schools all across Greater Houston. And Lord, we know that times right now are uncertain. We don't know all the answers that we have about what school will look like in the new year, but we are so thankful for Pam and her leadership and the ways that she serves schools and students and families, and has helped us today think through ways that we as churches can partner with our schools. So Lord, I pray that you would go before us now and do a mighty work, open doors, and help us as church leaders mobilize our congregations to help with food insecurity, to help with technology, to help with mentoring, and to pray and publicly recognize our schools. I thank you also, Lord, for bringing together school leaders on today's call. We are just so grateful for them and the hard work that they've been doing this year, especially this year. And we just pray a special blessing upon them and also upon Pam. We thank you, Lord, and we praise you for what you're going to do, and we thank you for using us. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Awesome. Thank you, Mel. Thank y'all for joining us. We're going to send out an evaluation link also. So if you guys have any feedback about whether or not this was helpful, whether or not there's something else that would be helpful in one of our future calls, that would be great. So thank y'all so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Stay safe and well.
You also.